December 1944, Battle of the Bulge. The German Tiger tank was supposed to be invincible. 88mm gun, 100mm of frontal armor, and a reputation that made Allied crews abandon their tanks at first sight. But by war's end, these steel monsters were being picked off like sitting ducks by American tank destroyers that cost a fraction of the price and used clever tactics the Germans never saw coming. What fatal flaw in German tank doctrine turned their most feared weapon into easy prey for supposedly inferior American forces?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The snow fell thick across the German countryside in December 1944. Winter had come early and harsh that year. The ground froze hard as stone. Tree branches bent low under heavy white loads. In small towns and big cities alike, people huddled around whatever heat they could find. Germany was losing the war. Everyone knew it, though few dared say it out loud. The Allied armies pressed in from the west. The Soviet forces pushed from the east. German soldiers retreated on all fronts. Food grew scarce in the shops. Coal became harder to find. Mothers waited in long lines for bread that might not come. The German war machine still turned its gears, but the metal grew thin. Factories worked day and night to build tanks and planes, but raw materials ran short. Steel became precious. Rubber disappeared. Oil supplies dwindled to drops. Young boys and old men now worked the assembly lines where strong men once stood. Inside the tank factories, workers moved with desperate speed. They knew American bombers might come at any moment. The air raid sirens wailed almost daily now. People rushed to shelters carved deep in the earth. After the all clear sounded, they returned to find more buildings reduced to rubble and dust. The Nazi Party still controlled every aspect of daily life. Propaganda posters covered every wall. Radio broadcasts promised victory was near. Party officials walked the streets in their crisp uniforms. They watched for signs of doubt or fear. Speaking against the war could mean prison or worse. Families learned to whisper their real thoughts behind closed doors. In this world of fear and want, one machine still struck terror in enemy hearts. The Tiger tank rolled across battlefields like a metal monster from nightmares. It weighed 60 tons of pure destruction. Its main gun could punch holes through the thickest enemy armor from over a mile away. The front armor measured 4 inches thick. Most Allied shells bounced off like pebbles thrown at a castle wall. German tank crews felt like kings when they climbed inside a Tiger. The machine made them feel powerful and safe. They had trained for months to master its complex systems. Loading the massive shells required 2 men working together. The engine roared with the sound of controlled thunder. When the main gun fired, the entire 60-ton beast rocked backward from the force.
These steel giants cost as much as 40 smaller tanks to build. Each one required months of careful work by skilled craftsmen. Special steel had to be shaped with precision tools. The transmission alone contained hundreds of moving parts. Every Tiger represented a huge investment of Germany's shrinking resources. Tank Commander Hans Müller had spent 2 years learning to fight in his Tiger. He knew every switch and lever by heart. His crew worked together like parts of a single machine. They had fought across Russia and France. Enemy tanks fled when they saw the Tiger's massive form approaching. Hans felt proud of his crew and their mighty weapon. But strange reports began reaching the tank crews in late 1944. American forces had new weapons they called tank destroyers. These machines looked different from regular tanks. They sat lower to the ground. Their armor seemed thinner, yet somehow they were knocking out Tigers in increasing numbers. At first, Hans and his fellow commanders dismissed these reports. How could thin-skinned American machines threaten their mighty Tigers? The reports must be wrong. Perhaps enemy propaganda was trying to scare them. Or maybe inexperienced crews were making fatal mistakes in battle. the truth felt more troubling than anyone wanted to admit. American industry had found ways to build weapons faster and cheaper than Germany ever imagined possible. While Germans crafted each Tiger by hand like a work of art, Americans mass-produced their tank destroyers like cars rolling off assembly lines. American tank destroyer crews trained with different tactics than German tank crews. Germans believed in direct frontal assault. They drove straight at the enemy and trusted their thick armor to protect them. Americans learned to hide and wait. They studied German weaknesses. They practiced shooting at specific target points that could disable a Tiger with one well-placed shot. The M36 tank destroyer mounted a 90mm gun that could penetrate Tiger armor at the right angle and distance. It weighed only 30 tons compared to the Tiger's 60. This lighter weight meant it could move faster and hide more easily. American crews learned to shoot and then quickly move to a new position before the Germans could respond. More concerning still were reports of American weapons that seemed impossible. Stories spread of handheld rocket launchers that individual soldiers could carry. Tank crews whispered about new types of ammunition that could burn through the thickest armor. Some claimed the Americans had developed shells that exploded inside tanks after penetrating the armor. Hans tried to ignore these troubling tales as he prepared his Tiger for another mission. The engine started with its familiar deep rumble. His crew checked their equipment with practiced efficiency. Everything seemed normal and reassuring inside their metal fortress.
Yet something had changed in the way other soldiers looked at the Tiger crews. The old expressions of awe and confidence had shifted to something else. Hope mixed with doubt. Pride tinged with worry. Even the mighty Tiger tank might not be enough to turn the tide of this war. As Hans guided his 60-ton machine toward the front lines, he wondered what new surprises the Americans might have waiting for them. The Tiger had ruled battlefields for 2 years. Could that dominance really be coming to an end? What secret advantages were the enemy forces hiding behind their seemingly inferior equipment? Hans Müller's Tiger tank rolled through the Belgian forest on a cold January morning in 1945. The massive machine crushed fallen branches under its steel tracks. Each track weighed as much as a small car. The engine's deep rumble echoed between the bare trees like distant thunder. His crew had fought together for 18 months. Gunner Fritz knew exactly how long it took to load the huge 88mm shells. Driver Klaus could navigate the 60-ton beast through the tightest spaces. Radio operator Wilhelm kept them connected to other German units. They moved as one mind inside their metal fortress. The Tiger's thick armor had saved their lives dozens of times. Russian anti-tank guns had bounced shells off their front plate like raindrops on a roof. British tanks had fled when they saw the Tiger approaching. French resistance fighters could only hide and pray the monster would pass them by. But today felt different. Wilhelm picked up radio chatter from other German units. The voices sounded strained and worried. 3 Tigers had been destroyed in the past week. The enemy was using new tactics that no one seemed to understand. Hans pushed these thoughts away as they reached their assigned position. Through his periscope, he spotted movement in the distance. American soldiers were setting up some kind of equipment behind a low hill. It looked like a small cannon, but it seemed too thin and light to threaten a Tiger tank. The American weapon was an M36 tank destroyer. It mounted a 90mm gun on a chassis that weighed half as much as the Tiger. The crew of 5 men could set it up quickly and move it just as fast. They had trained for months to fight German tanks using hit-and-run tactics. Hans ordered his driver to advance. The Tiger lurched forward with mechanical confidence. Its tracks bit deep into the frozen ground. The main gun swiveled toward the American position like the head of a hunting beast. Fritz already had a shell loaded and ready to fire. At 800 meters, Hans could see the American crew clearly. They seemed calm and focused as they aimed their weapon. This surprised him.
Most enemy soldiers showed fear when facing a Tiger tank. These men acted like they were hunting rabbits instead of confronting Germany's most powerful weapon.
The American gunner fired first. The 90mm shell struck the Tiger's front armor with a sound like a giant bell being rung. Hans felt the impact through the floor of his tank, but the thick steel held firm. The shell bounced away into the trees without penetrating. Hans smiled grimly and ordered Fritz to return fire. The Tiger's 88mm gun roared with earth-shaking power. The massive shell screamed across the battlefield at incredible speed. It struck exactly where the American weapon had been positioned just seconds before. But the M-36 tank destroyer was already gone. The American crew had fired their shot and immediately moved to a new position 50 meters away. By the time the Tiger's shell arrived, it found only empty ground and scattered equipment. This pattern repeated 3 more times over the next 10 minutes. The Americans would appear at a new location, fire a single shot, and then vanish before the Tiger could respond. Each 90mm shell struck the German tank's armor without penetrating, but the constant impacts were taking their toll. Klaus reported that the Tiger's electrical systems were showing problems. The repeated shock from enemy shells had loosened connections inside the tank. Some instruments flickered on and off. The radio crackled with static that made communication difficult. Worse still, the Tiger was burning through its fuel supply at an alarming rate. The massive engine consumed gasoline like a thirsty giant. All the turning and maneuvering to track the fast-moving Americans was draining their tanks. Soon they would need to retreat for refueling. Hans began to understand what was happening. The Americans were not trying to destroy his Tiger with direct hits. They were wearing it down through constant harassment. Like a pack of wolves attacking a bear, they struck quickly and then retreated before the larger enemy could retaliate. The M-36 crew had studied German tank tactics for months. They knew Tigers preferred to fight at long range, where their thick armor and powerful gun gave them the greatest advantage. So the Americans forced the battle into close quarters, where speed and agility mattered more than raw firepower. On their 5th attack, the American gunner aimed for a different target. Instead of hitting the Tiger's front armor, he aimed for the tank's tracks. The 90mm shell struck the left track assembly and severed 3 steel links. The massive tank lurched to a halt, unable to move forward or backward. Now Hans faced every tank commander's nightmare. His Tiger had become a stationary target. Without the ability to move and change position, they were sitting ducks for enemy fire. The thick armor that had protected them so well meant nothing if enemies could attack from the sides or rear.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Fritz loaded another shell and tried to keep the American tank destroyer in his sights. But the M-36 could now circle around the disabled Tiger like a shark around wounded prey. The German crew could only rotate their turret and hope to get lucky with a single shot. The Americans had discovered something that German tank doctrine had never considered. Superior firepower meant nothing if you could not bring it to bear on a fast-moving target. Thick armor became a disadvantage when it made your tank too slow to keep up with nimble enemies. As Wilhelm frantically called for support on the radio, Hans realized they were witnessing the end of an era. The age of the invincible Tiger tank was coming to a close. What tactical revolution had the Americans unleashed that could turn 60 tons of German engineering into helpless prey? The disabled Tiger tank sat motionless in the Belgian forest like a wounded giant. Hans Müller stared through his periscope at the American M-36 tank destroyer circling his position. Sweat dripped down his face despite the January cold. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Everything he had been taught about tank warfare was wrong. For 2 years, Hans had believed in the German way of fighting. Charge straight at the enemy with superior firepower and thick armor. Meet force with greater force. Trust in German engineering and steel to carry the day. The Tiger represented the peak of this philosophy. 60 tons of unstoppable metal that could destroy any enemy tank from over a mile away. But now he watched 5 American soldiers in a machine half the weight of his Tiger completely dominate the battlefield. They moved like dancers while his crew sat trapped in their steel coffin. The Americans had turned every advantage of the Tiger into a weakness. The thick armor that made Hans feel invincible also made his tank slow and clumsy. The powerful gun that could destroy anything at long range was useless against targets that refused to stay still. The complex engineering that impressed German officers had created a machine too complicated to repair in the field. Through his radio, Hans heard the voices of other Tiger commanders facing the same nightmare. Lieutenant Weber reported his tank destroyed by a weapon he never saw coming. Captain Richter called for help as American tank destroyers attacked his position from 3 directions at once. The proud Tiger battalions were being picked apart piece by piece.
Wilhelm picked up American radio transmissions that chilled Hans to the bone. The enemy crews talked calmly about destroying German tanks like they were discussing the weather. They used code names and coordinates with military precision. These were not the frightened soldiers that German propaganda had described. These were professionals who had studied their enemy and found ways to win. The Americans had discovered that tank warfare was not about building the biggest and strongest machine. It was about using the right weapon for the right job at the right time. The M36 tank destroyer existed for one purpose only: hunt and kill German tanks. It carried no extra equipment or fancy features, just a powerful gun, enough armor to stop small arms fire, and the speed to strike and escape. Hans thought about the German factories working day and night to build each Tiger by hand. Skilled craftsmen spent weeks shaping the thick armor plates. The complex transmission required hundreds of precision parts. Each tank cost enough money to build 40 smaller vehicles. Germany was losing the war of production before the first shot was fired. American factories produced weapons like rivers flowing with steel. They built 10 M36 tank destroyers in the time it took to complete one Tiger. If the Americans lost a tank destroyer, they could replace it within days. When a Tiger was destroyed, months passed before a new one could take its place. The American crew had been trained to fight as a team with other units. Radio operators called in artillery strikes to pin down German tanks. Aircraft circled overhead, ready to attack with rockets and bombs. Infantry soldiers with handheld anti-tank weapons waited in hidden positions. The Americans fought as one massive machine with many moving parts. German tank crews had been taught to fight alone or in small groups. Each Tiger was expected to be a complete weapon system that could handle any threat. But no single tank, no matter how powerful, could defend against coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The Tiger's greatest strength had become its fatal weakness. Hans watched the M36 position itself for a side shot at his disabled tank. The American gunner took careful aim at the Tiger's thinner side armor. At this range and angle, the 90mm shell would punch through the steel like paper. Hans knew his crew had perhaps 30 seconds left to live. But something strange happened in that moment of approaching death. Instead of fear, Hans felt a deep understanding wash over him. The Americans had not won through superior courage or better soldiers. They had won by thinking differently about how wars are fought in the modern world.
The tiger represented the old way of warfare. Individual heroes and superior weapons deciding battles through personal strength and skill. It was warfare from the age of knights and castles, when one great warrior could change the course of history. The Americans fought with the methods of the industrial age. Mass production, coordinated teamwork, and weapons designed for specific purposes. They treated war like a science problem that could be solved through careful study and clever engineering. Fritz loaded one final shell into the tiger's main gun. His hand shook as he worked the heavy mechanism. Klaus gripped the useless driving controls with white knuckles. Wilhelm kept calling desperately for support that would never come. They were brave men facing death with dignity. Hans realized that Germany had been fighting the wrong war all along. While German engineers perfected individual weapons like works of art, American factories had perfected the art of war itself. The Tiger was a masterpiece of steel and engineering, but masterpieces belonged in museums, not on battlefields where survival demanded speed, simplicity, and numbers. The M36's gun swiveled toward the Tiger's vulnerable side armor. Hans closed his eyes and wondered if other German commanders would learn this lesson before it was too late. Had the mighty Tiger tank taught the German army its final and most important lesson about the true nature of modern warfare? Hans Müller returned to Germany in the summer of 1945 as a prisoner of war. The train wheezed and coughed its way across a landscape of rubble and ash. Bombed-out cities stretched as far as his tired eyes could see. Factory smokestacks stood broken like snapped bones against the gray sky. The mighty German war machine had been ground to dust. He carried with him a small notebook filled with sketches and observations. Page after page showed American tank destroyers from every angle he could remember. He had drawn the M36's thin armor and compact design. He had calculated its weight and speed compared to the Tiger. Most importantly, he had written down the tactical lessons that cost him his crew and his war. The American prison camp had been unlike anything German propaganda had prepared him for. Instead of brutal treatment, he found organized efficiency. American guards followed clear rules about prisoner treatment. Food arrived on schedule in quantities that seemed impossible given wartime shortages. Medical care was provided without question or favor. Hans had spent months talking with other captured German tank commanders. Each man told similar stories of defeat at the hands of American weapons they had never imagined. The Americans had not won through superior individual machines. They had won by creating an entire system of warfare the German doctrine could never counter. Captain Richter had survived the destruction of his Tiger by an American Hellcat tank destroyer. The Hellcat weighed only 18 tons, but could travel twice as fast as any German tank. American crews used this speed to attack from unexpected directions and escape before German guns could respond. Lieutenant Weber described watching American P-47 aircraft destroy an entire German tank column with rocket attacks. The planes worked together with ground forces through radio communications. German tanks that survived air attacks found American tank destroyers waiting in prepared positions along their escape routes. Every story followed the same pattern. Americans fought as teams, while Germans fought as individuals. American weapons were designed to work together in coordinated attacks. German weapons were built to be superior in single combat, but vulnerable to organized assault. The train finally wheezed to a stop in what had once been the industrial heart of Germany. Hans stepped onto the platform and breathed air thick with dust from collapsed buildings.
Women in patched clothing searched through rubble for anything useful. Children played with toys made from scrap metal and broken glass. His hometown looked like a ghost of its former self. The tank factory where Tigers had been built now stood as twisted metal and shattered concrete. American bombers had found their targets with deadly precision. The skilled craftsmen who had shaped thick armor plates were gone. Some had died in the bombing, others had fled to find work in the countryside. Hans walked through streets he barely recognized. The propaganda posters that once covered every wall had been torn down or painted over. No more promises of final victory or superior German weapons. Reality had swept away the comfortable lies that had sustained the war effort for so long. At his family home, Hans found his father sitting in the kitchen, staring at a broken radio. The old man looked up with eyes that held no hope. He had spent the war believing in Tiger tanks and wonder weapons that would turn the tide of battle. Now he struggled to understand how Germany's finest engineering had been defeated by what seemed like simple American machines. Hans opened his notebook and began to explain what he had learned. The Americans had discovered that modern warfare was not about building the perfect weapon. It was about building the right weapon for each specific job and making enough of them to matter. The Tiger had been designed like a medieval castle, built to withstand direct attack through superior strength and thickness. But American tank destroyers were designed like guerrilla fighters. They struck quickly from unexpected angles and disappeared before the enemy could respond. They worked in teams with aircraft, artillery, and infantry. Each piece of the American war machine supported every other piece.
Hans showed his father sketches of the M36 tank destroyer that had disabled his Tiger. The American machine looked crude compared to German engineering. Its armor was thin, its construction seemed simple, but it had been built for mass production and battlefield effectiveness rather than engineering perfection. The German way of war had valued individual excellence over teamwork. Each Tiger crew was expected to be heroes who could defeat any enemy through personal skill and superior equipment. The Americans had created a system where average soldiers with good equipment and clear tactics could defeat the best German crews. Hans realized that this lesson extended far beyond tank warfare. German industry had focused on creating masterpieces of engineering that took months to build and required constant maintenance. American industry had focused on creating simple, reliable weapons that could be mass-produced and easily repaired in the field. The Tiger tank had been Germany's masterpiece of armored warfare, but in the end, masterpieces belonged in museums, while practical solutions won battles. The Americans had understood that victory came not from building the perfect tank, but from building enough good tanks and using them correctly. As Hans closed his notebook for the final time, he reflected on what the Tiger tank had really taught him. Superior technology meant nothing without superior strategy. Individual excellence could not overcome systematic disadvantage. The most beautiful machine in the world was useless if it could not be built, supplied, and deployed effectively. The age of the Tiger had ended, not because American tanks were better, but because Americans had learned to fight a different kind of war entirely. What would future generations learn from this costly lesson about the true nature of victory in modern warfare? Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.